하수길, 그리고 중록원, 담양호, 추월산 이제 이런 풍경들을 보실 수 있도록 해드리고 있습니다.
담양호랑 중록원이랑 이렇게 옆에서 조종사분께서 다 이렇게 설명을 해주시거든요. 그런 거 보는 재미도 있고 직접 이렇게 조종할 수 있게끔 체험도 괜찮았던 것 같아요.
In our headlines on this Monday, March 17th, here in South Korea. The U.S. Energy Department places South Korea on the lowest tier of its sensitive countries list in January, just before the Biden administration left office, amid talk of nuclear arms development in South Korea and its brief imposition of martial law. Meanwhile, Trump's reciprocal tariffs on all American trade partners, including South Korea, will go into effect in early April as scheduled, regardless of the presence of free trade agreements, before his administration sits down for respective bilateral trade talks. On the national front, while the Constitutional Court has yet to decide on the president's fate, rival political parties vowed to accept the court's verdict regardless of their respective stances and the deep divide among members of the Korean public who continue to take to the streets. The government here is hoping to better understand the U.S. Energy Department's decision to designate South Korea as a sensitive country shortly before the Biden administration left office in January. Kim Jong-sil has our top story.
South Korea, a key U.S. ally, has been added to the U.S. Energy Department's sensitive and other designated countries list, expanding it to 26 alongside North Korea, China, Russia, and Iran. The designation allows the U.S. to impose restrictions on science and technology cooperation. While South Korea is in the lowest tier as other designated countries, it remains the only U.S. ally with a formal defense treaty. Although current cooperation is assured, future research and technology sharing will face heightened scrutiny. The U.S. decision made in January follows South Korean President Yoon's controversial martial law declaration in December, which experts suggest may have influenced the move.
Due to South Korea's serious domestic political turmoil at the time, the U.S. placed it in the lowest category, other designated countries on the SCL.
The U.S. list cites concerns over national security, nuclear non-proliferation, and terrorism, leading some experts in Seoul to believe that growing discussions on South Korea's nuclear self-reliance may have also influenced the designation.
I think one of the main reasons is, political upheaval that has been going on in South Korea, but more importantly, acquiring own nuclear weapon capability.
The government was caught off guard with no prior notification. Acting President Choi Sang-mok led an emergency meeting on Monday, stressing the need for active communication with Washington to avoid disrupting cooperation. The Minister of Trade, Industry and Energy has been instructed to engage with its U.S. counterpart this week. Experts suggest that once South Korea resolves its domestic political turmoil, it could be removed from the list.
Once the Constitutional Court's decision on the impeachment is announced, the political turmoil in South Korea will be resolved. In that case, there would be no reason for the Trump administration to keep South Korea on this list.
Seoul is actively engaging with Washington to resolve the issue before the designation takes effect on April 15th. Kim Jong-sil, Arirang News.
And Trump's reciprocal tariffs on all American trade partners, including South Korea, will go into effect in early April as scheduled, regardless of the presence of free trade agreements, before his administration sits down for respective bilateral trade talks. Our correspondent Lee Soo-jin has details.
The United States is considering forging new trade agreements, which could also impact free trade agreement partners like South Korea. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, in a CBS interview on Sunday, local Times said that the U.S. could potentially engage in bilateral agreements with countries after resetting a new baseline of fairness and reciprocity. He emphasized that bilateral negotiations would not begin until reciprocal tariffs were fully implemented on countries like Canada, Mexico, and most of the EU, suggesting the tariffs could serve as a bargaining tool. He also stated that the reciprocal tariffs are not targeted towards specific nations but apply to all countries. South Korea's Trade Minister Choi Min-jeong, who visited Washington to request an exemption from the tariffs, said on his return that the reciprocal tariffs on South Korea are likely to take effect on April 2nd, as President Donald Trump previously announced.
The goal of reducing the trade deficit through reciprocal tariffs has not changed. Since President Trump directly oversees these tariffs, it's highly likely that his policies will be carried out as planned.
While there were no discussions on specific items like automobiles or beef, he said that the U.S. highlighted how South Korea's sanitary policies and technical regulations have made it difficult for the U.S. to access the Korean market. Chung's trip to the U.S. to meet with his counterpart follows Trump's accusation earlier this month that South Korea imposes tariffs 4 times higher than those of the U.S., a claim that Korea disputed. South Korea's effective tariff rate on U.S. imports stands at 0.79% as of 2024, in line with the two countries' FTA, a sharp drop from the 2.48% in 2015. While it is unclear whether South Korea's FTA with the United States will be revised or replaced by a completely new deal, given that it was already revised during Trump's first term, it is highly likely that further adjustments will be considered in response to the changing trade dynamics. 이수진, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, to uphold or not to uphold the president's impeachment, now that is the question that the Constitutional Court is yet to answer, but one that members of the public have already answered and are sharing on the streets. Now, that being said, rival political parties have voiced their intentions to abide by the court's verdict regardless of their respective stances. Oh Seong has the latest.
The mood is restless as the nation awaits the Constitutional Court's ruling on President Yoon Suk-yeol's impeachment following his December 3rd martial law last year. With no indication of when the 8-member bench will issue its verdict, which was widely expected last Friday, the court's deliberation period has stretched beyond 2 weeks, longer than it took for the impeachment trials of former Presidents Park Geun-hye and Roh Moo-hyun. As the court typically announces the ruling schedule at least 2 days in advance, the earliest date would be later this week, most likely on Friday. In any case, it's highly probable that the bench will deliver the ruling before April 18th, when 2 justices retire. As Judgment Day draws closer, police estimate 44,000 protesters gathered in Gwanghwamun Square over the weekend, calling for Yoon's impeachment, while some 60,000 rallied against it, as public opinion remains deeply divided. To minimize the turmoil expected after the ruling, political leaders are being urged to send a clear message that they will accept the court's verdict no matter what. The ruling People Power Party leadership says Sunday they have already expressed their commitment to accepting the court's ruling multiple times and emphasized this remains the party's official stance.
Whether it is a joint press conference between ruling and opposition party leaders or a joint statement, we will issue a message of acceptance in some form.
Democratic Party leader Lee Jae-myung has also expressed his willingness to accept the ruling during a YouTube broadcast, while floor leader Park Chan-dae said respecting the court's decision is a given. Still, both sides of the political spectrum are stepping up pressure on the judicial bench. Over the weekend, some ruling party lawmakers continue to protest against impeachment, holding marathon demonstrations outside the Constitutional Court for the 6th straight day. Meanwhile, opposition lawmakers staged an 8.7-mile march from the National Assembly to Gwanghwamun Square, urging Yoon's removal. As for the president, Yoon has been silent and has not issued public messages while the court deliberates on his fate. His lawyer has previously said that the president would accept the court's decision. A presidential official told local media on Sunday that Yoon remains at his residence and is calmly waiting for the verdict. Oh Seong, Arirang News.
And the Seoul Central District Court has begun the trials of several military and police authorities on charges of insurrection amid the short-lived martial law declared by President Yoon Suk-yeol on December 3rd. Former Defense Minister Kim Yong-hyun was at the court earlier this afternoon amid allegations that he sought to keep lawmakers from entering the parliament to vote against the martial law. Former head of the Korea Defense Intelligence Command, No Sang-won, was also at the court here in Seoul. And later this week, suspended Commissioner of the National Police Agency, Cho Ji-ho, is scheduled to appear at court. In the latest bid to ink a truce between Ukraine and Russia, talks over the phone are reportedly supposed to take place between the US and Russian leaders this week. Our Lee Seung-jae reports.
U.S. President Donald Trump has said recent negotiations with Russia to end the war with Ukraine are going well. He also expressed confidence that Russian President Vladimir Putin will agree to a ceasefire. According to U.S. Special Envoy to the Middle East, Steve Witkoff, on Sunday, the two leaders are expected to hold phone talks this week. Witkoff met Putin in person in Moscow last week to further discuss a potential ceasefire deal that will finally put a halt to over 3 years of war. The envoy expressed optimism over the phone call, saying that the presidents are going to have a really good and positive discussion this week. He also voiced confidence that a deal would be reached in the coming weeks. Witkoff explained that Washington is also in communication with Kyiv, adding that while the situation is complicated, the gap between the two sides is narrowing. U.S. negotiators are set to meet with counterparts from both Ukraine and Russia during the coming week to further engage in ceasefire talks. Meanwhile, the European Union is set to discuss measures to provide additional weapons to Ukraine worth over $43 billion during its foreign ministers' meeting and a leaders' summit. On Thursday, the military chiefs from countries participating in the Coalition of the Willing will meet in the UK to discuss post-war peacekeeping. While plans for deploying peacekeeping troops to key locations and training Ukrainian forces are being discussed, the process is expected to face several hurdles as many countries are reluctant to send troops. 이승재, Arirang News.
In other news, the Palestinian militant group Hamas will release an American-Israeli hostage and the bodies of 4 other hostages if Israel abides by the ceasefire agreement. Now, this is according to the Associated Press, citing the words of a senior Hamas official who also called for talks on the second phase of the ceasefire deal to start on the day of this release and to last a maximum of 50 days. He further demanded Israel allow essential aid to flow into Gaza and to retreat from the Rafah crossing. Also in the Middle East, U.S. fighter jets targeted several Houthi drones launched from Yemen this past Sunday amid attacks on American Navy ships following U.S. bombings of Houthi militant sites in Yemen. Our Choi Min-jeong has the latest.
Powerful explosions occurred across many regions of Yemen, including its capital Sana'a, over the weekend. U.S. forces carried out more than 170 airstrikes against Iran-backed Houthi rebels in the Middle Eastern country. The U.S. targeted military bases, specifically their missile and drone capabilities in Houthi-controlled areas of Yemen. The operation was aimed at deterring attacks on international shipping routes in the Red Sea and to secure maritime navigation there. President Trump said the U.S. responded to Houthi attacks on American ships and aircraft in the Red Sea and Gulf of Aden. Trump's national security advisor, Michael Waltz, told ABC News on Sunday that Iran should be held responsible for supporting the rebel group.
This was an overwhelming response that actually targeted multiple Houthi leaders and took them out. And the difference here is, one, going after the Houthi leadership, and 2, holding Iran responsible. It is Iran that has repeatedly funded, resourced, trained, and helped the Houthis.
The Houthi-run health ministry reported that the strikes resulted in at least 53 deaths and injured over 100 people. In retaliation to the airstrikes, the self-styled Yemeni armed forces stated that they would target all American warships in the Red and Arabian Seas.
The Yemeni armed forces will not hesitate to target all American warships in the Red Sea and the Arabian Sea in retaliation to the aggression against our country.
These forces carried out a military operation on Sunday local time with multiple ballistic missiles and drones launched at the American aircraft carrier USS Harry S. Truman and its battle group. However, the U.S. stated that 11 drones were shot down by U.S. aircraft while the missiles malfunctioned and fell into the sea. The United Nations expressed concern over the U.S. and Houthi clashes and urged for a halt to all military activities. Choi Min-jeong, Arirang News.
U.S. government-funded broadcaster Voice of America is shutting down after 83 years in service. The virtual shutdown follows an executive order from the Trump administration on Friday directing the U.S. Agency for Global Media, which houses VOA, to operate with the legally required minimum staff.
Accordingly, almost the entire staff of 1,300 people at VOA have reportedly been placed on paid leave. In sports news, speed skater Choi Min-jeong garnered gold in the women's 1,500-meter race at the 2025 World Championships. On Sunday in Beijing, Choi crossed the finish line first at 2 minutes 27.136 seconds. She now qualifies for the 2026 Winter Olympics. Meanwhile, also in the event, Korea's Kim Ki-lee won the bronze medal. And Olympic badminton champion An Se-young clinched yet another All-England Open title this past Sunday. Despite a leg injury in the first game, she made a remarkable rebound to claim victory in the 95-minute battle against China's Wang Ziyi. This marks her second All-England Open triumph following her 2023 win. An has dominated 2025 so far, securing 4 executive international titles and extending her winning streak to 20 matches. In science news, the story of taste, especially that of sweetness as well as bitterness, begin in the brain with intriguing power dynamics. Our Choi Min-jeong explains.
As fruit flies are often used as experimental models, researchers created genetically engineered fruit flies that are vitalized when their sensory neurons are activated. When their sensory neurons for sweet taste were activated, they suppressed the sensory neurons for bitter taste. On the other hand, when sensory neurons for bitter taste were activated, those for sweet taste were not suppressed. This is because sensory neurons for sweet taste can control those for bitter tastes.
When sensory neurons for sweet taste are activated, those for bitter tastes are suppressed due to the electric field from the sweet-activated sensory neurons. As a result, when there are bitter and sweet tastes at the same time, the bitter tastes are eliminated.
The researchers explained that this principle could be the reason why black coffee tastes bitter, while coffee mixtures with sugar taste less bitter or fruit juices taste less sour. As a mechanism of the suppression interaction among sensory neurons for taste has been uncovered from fruit fly experiments, researchers expect that this will help with experiments on sensory neurons of different species, including animals and eventually people. Choi Min-jeong, Arirang News.
This is The World Now, bringing you the latest stories from around the globe. In the North Macedonian town of Kochani, a devastating fire engulfed a nightclub, resulting in the death of at least 59 people and injuries for more than 150 others. The fire broke out at the Pulse nightclub in Kochani at approximately 2:35 a.m. on Sunday local time during a concert by a local hip-hop duo. The fire was reportedly caused by pyrotechnic devices used during the performance, which set the club's ceiling alight. Reports also say the venue was overcrowded, leading to a stampede as people tried to escape through limited exits. Emergency responders faced challenges due to the intensity of the fire and the club's overcrowded conditions. Authorities detained 15 individuals in connection with the incident amid allegations that the nightclub was operating without proper licensing and had exceeded its capacity. The North Macedonian government declared a 7-day period of national mourning following the tragedy. The United States has been experiencing a significant surge in egg prices, with the average cost reaching $5.90 per dozen in February. While the price hike is primarily due to a severe avian influenza outbreak, some consumers are attempting to source cheaper eggs from neighboring countries such as Mexico, where prices average under $2 per dozen. However, U.S. Customs and Border Protection has reported a 36% increase in egg smuggling incidents this fiscal year. Meanwhile, the U.S. has turned to several European countries, including Denmark, for egg imports to curb soaring prices. Disney's live-action movie Snow White premiered in Los Angeles on Saturday local time with a notably subdued event. The premiere featured limited media presence, with interviews conducted primarily by Disney-affiliated personnel. The film has been surrounded by controversies, including criticism over the casting of Rachel Zegler, a Latina actress, as Snow White, and debates regarding the portrayal of the Seven Dwarfs. Also, the differing political views between Zegler and co-star Gal Gadot as the evil queen have fueled further discussions. The film is scheduled for worldwide theatrical release on March 21st. Choi Ji-hee, Arirang News.
The cold snap has made a return and it feels like winter again. This morning in Seoul, the temperature was minus 1.3 degrees Celsius and it stayed cold through the day with icy winds. Tomorrow will be just as cold as today with the daytime temperature reaching up to only 6 degrees. Snow will begin again late tonight in the Seoul metropolitan area in Chungcheongnam-do province, and heavy snow will fall across the country tomorrow. Looking at the expected snowfall, up to 10 centimeters of snow will fall in Seoul, and between 20 to 30 centimeters is expected around the eastern mountainous areas. Please be prepared in advance. Tomorrow morning will start off at minus 4 degrees in Chuncheon, Daejeon at 0 degrees. Daily highs will move up to 6 to 9 degrees all over the country. From Thursday, spring weather will come back with Seoul reaching up to 15 degrees. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world.
Right, those are the headlines at this hour here in South Korea. Coming up right after this break is our daily panel session. Do stay with us. Thank you for now.
How to survive in Korea. Barbecue restaurants. Step 1. Taking care of your clothes. Put your jacket in the plastic bag. Seal it tight. If the stool flips open, store your clothes inside. Wearing light colors? Grab an apron. It's the best defense against oil splatter and smoke. Step 2. Bottomless side dishes. Basic side dishes at a barbecue restaurant. Eat, and eat as much as you want. Side dishes come with free refills. Oh, and if you don't see this sign, just ask, 사장님, 여기 밑반찬 좀 더 주세요. Simple, isn't it? Step 3. Grilling meat. There are various kinds of samgyeopsal in Korea. Place the meat on the grill. Turn it over when golden. And again when it looks done. Again and again and again. Step 4. Sam style. You aren't taking bites of sam like a taco, are you? In Korea, we have it in one bite. A pro tip here. Add only as much as you can handle in a bite. Gotta avoid awkward situations. Step 5. Enjoy the perks. After the meal, enjoy the perks offered as a Korean restaurant. Fabric refreshers get rid of the barbecue smell, while mint candies freshen your breath. Did you survive the barbecue restaurant? Hang on. Are you here with someone you want to impress? Then let's skip the garlic. Who knows what will happen?
Acting President Choi Min-jeong has spoken of hopes to convince U.S. President Donald Trump against tariffs on South Korean imports into the American market. We have more on Press Perspective today. Hope your work week is off to a good start. It's Monday, March 17th here in Seoul, and you're watching Press Perspective. I'm Min Sun-hee. U.S. tariffs and cross-border tensions are among the mounting concerns of the South Korean government, as it also hopes for a quick end to the political turmoil here on the local front. For more, I have Stephen Borwick with Japanese weekly news magazine Nikkei Asia here in the studio. Stephen, welcome back.
Nice to be here.
I also have freelance journalist Rafael Rashid with us. Rafael, it's great to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
Right, Stephen, we'll start with you. As I mentioned at the start in that short clip that we saw, the Wall Street Journal published an exclusive interview with acting President Choi Min-jeong and his thoughts about trade with the U.S. under the Trump administration. For the sake of our viewers who may not have had the chance to read that article, do go over the gist of the article for us, and also do include your takeaways.
I think the main takeaway of this story is that it captures Che as kind of at a disconnect from what's happening in Washington at this kind of pivotal time, and how the ongoing political uncertainty in South Korea has left Seoul sort of ill-equipped or ill-positioned to respond to the very significant changes that are taking place in Washington. And the interview demonstrates how South Korea and the U.S. have this long-standing alliance. They have really extensive trade ties. They have a very important defense relationship. And they have, like, what I think both sides generally feel like has been a mutually beneficial relationship that's gone on for decades. And in Che's responses to the Wall Street Journal, he kind of keeps emphasizing that sort of mutually beneficial nature, and he keeps trying to put forth this message that by working together, these two countries have customarily helped each other out economically and security-wise and all the rest, and so it doesn't really make sense for them to be engaging in a kind of face-off of this nature. But, I mean, this is really just bad timing. I mean, nobody really saw this protracted leadership vacuum in South Korea, and I don't think anybody thought that the early stages of the Trump administration would see as many decisive moves as we have seen. And Che is really, the article kind of draws this out too, Che is really, you know, he didn't plan for this himself. Like, he's in a kind of really difficult situation. You know, he didn't get into his current position thinking that, like, as what he once was, he was the third in command after President Yoon and Prime Minister Han Duck-soo. And then once Han got impeached, he had to step up. And he's really in an almost kind of impossible task where he's leading one of the world's larger economies, and he's being asked to address public concerns and government concerns about how the economy is changing and how the security landscape is changing, but he's really kind of limited in his authority. He can't really, you know, the National Assembly is not functioning. He does not have a lot of, despite his title, he does not have a lot of real authority. So it's a testament to this very kind of peculiar and unfortunate situation that he is in and the country is in.
Right. Rafael, this particular article by the Wall Street Journal also includes the findings by a Swiss-based research firm that claims South Korea ranks the most vulnerable with regard to trade risks from the Trump administration. That being said, Rafael, do you suppose the government here has been doing what it can to perhaps better address its future trade ties with the Trump administration going forward?
Perhaps. If we look at this survey in particular, it was published by the Global Trade Alert, and they basically look at all the different countries around the world, 173, and they have these specific red flag areas. And so these red flags cover, like, they measure risks like trade deficits or being subject to scrutiny by US officials, and South Korea has all 5 triggered red flags, so they are basically at the bottom of the list. And I think this vulnerability is precisely why we're seeing such open concern from the South Korean leadership. Acting President Choi has publicly acknowledged that the arrow of the Trump-led America First policy has begun to zero in on Korea. The recent suggestion, it was the other day in the news, the recent suggestion that Korean tariffs were 4 times higher than the American ones, although this was quickly refuted by South Korean officials as being inaccurate. I think this highlights how the country has become the specific target of the America First narrative. I think the government's response thus far has been measured, perhaps. Maybe it's been proactive, I would say. The Trade Minister, Jong In-kyo, had directly engaged with US counterparts and has requested for kind of exemptions, highlighting South Korea's substantial investments in the American economy. When it comes to acting President Choi, he has outlined some pragmatic strategy, emphasizing the trade surplus is temporary and offering Korean expertise when it comes to shipbuilding to revive the America's naval industry, and has pointed out to South Korea's over-delivery on promises to purchase US goods. But I think, as Stephen has pointed out, we're at a very unpredictable time with Choi having limited leadership given the ongoing impeachment proceedings, which creates, I guess, somewhat of a diplomatic handicap because it's difficult to know who to talk to. Trump, I think, is maybe reluctant to pick up the phone and talk to Choi when he might be gone in a few days. So I think Trump will be waiting for either the next leader or for Yoon to be reinstated to know who to talk to when it comes to these issues.
Right. And before we delve deeper into South Korea's efforts to deal with its trade concerns, Stephen, speaking as a Canadian journalist based here in Seoul, and also for the sake of comparison, could you tell us a bit about Canada's response to US tariffs?
Canada's retaliated with tariffs of their own, I believe, on $20.6 billion worth of U.S. goods. And these have hit key items like aluminum and steel and computers and, a bunch of, it's important to highlight that Canada and the U.S. have like what is arguably the most productive trade relationship in human history. They have this huge, long, mostly unfortified border. And, they're 2 quite wealthy countries, and they're 2 countries that have a lot of complementary overlap in their economies. Canada is very rich in energy and in manufacturing, and the U.S. produces a lot of consumer goods and all the rest. But Canada seems to have taken this, maybe antagonistic is the right word. They seem to believe that Trump is kind of flexing his muscles and Trump is kind of acting like a bully, and like the way that you must respond to a bully is, not with kindness or not with obsequiousness, but with force, by like meeting force with force. I mean, the premier of the province that I'm from, Premier Ford, has said that he's going to introduce a tariff and possibly even cut off exports of electricity, which go to a few American states, including Minnesota, that are near the border. And like that this tariff war like literally could result in people in some very cold parts of the United States like not having electricity. So this is all, kind of interesting to see. Canada, of course, has this reputation as like the nice country that, doesn't get angry about too much. But having grown up in Canada, I don't find this surprising because I know that in Canada there is this very like deep sense of kind of resentment of being like the junior partner in the relationship with the U.S. Like that this is this much bigger and much more powerful country that, if you're from Canada, you're constantly bombarded with like U.S. media and U.S. Culture, and there's this very strong sense that like the U.S. has this overbearing presence, and a lot of Canadians kind of feel have like over the decades felt kind of disrespected. So I think this is was kind of like a spark that lit a lot of lingering resentment. And the Canadian media has reported all these images of, in Ontario, the state liquor authority, which is like the biggest purchaser of alcohol in the world. It's all throughout the provinces. Alcoholic products are like overwhelmingly sold in these government stores, and they've said that they're not going to sell U.S. whiskey or U.S. beer anymore. And so there's these photos that have traveled very widely of like, you know, the California wine section being empty and having nothing in it other than a sign that says like buy Canadian wine instead. I mean, as a Canadian, I do, you know, there is like an emotional part of me that is heartened by seeing like a concerted response and like not a meek response, but you just have to step back and understand that like this economically, this is not going to be good for either country. I have sat in this chair in recent weeks and even months, and when asked about tariffs, I just keep going back to this point that like the economic consensus about tariffs is that they are harmful, that they drive up the prices of consumer goods. They generally do not lead to like the reshoring of manufacturing and like all the things that Trump says that they're going to do. They are harmful. And so we have to just keep in mind that perhaps it hasn't taken effect yet. I mean, we've seen some real havoc in the US stock market, but in the coming months, we can expect some real discouraging economic news. And putting politics aside, that's important to like focus that like people's real economic livelihoods are at stake.
Well, Mr. Trump himself has not crossed out the idea of a recession in the US amid his tariff campaign. Raphael, speaking as a British journalist based here in Seoul, what can you tell us about the UK's response to US tariffs?
Yeah, I think the UK has taken maybe a different approach when it comes to the tariffs issue, different from, say, the US or, as we've just seen, Canada. I think I'd characterize it maybe as a measured, if not pragmatic, approach, maybe a cautious approach. So we've seen, say, with the EU, they quickly announced 26 billion euros of retaliatory measures, targeting everything from Bourbon whiskey to Harley Davidsons, the motorcycles, of course. But then the British government has, I think, deliberately refrained from these kind of tit-for-tat tariffs. Prime Minister Keir Starmer did express disappointment, of course, but he also emphasized that the UK is rapidly negotiating a wider economic agreement with the US to eliminate additional tariffs. And I think this restraint from the UK authorities comes because of this kind of post-Brexit era that we're living in, this reality. There's a clear recognition that securing a broader, maybe trade deal with the US is a strategic priority, and escalating it into kind of a trade war would jeopardize that goal. I think it was very clear when we saw, say, King Charles inviting Trump for a second state visit, which was basically unprecedented, and the Prime Minister got a lot of criticism for, you know, basically delivering that invitation. But when confronted and asked, you know, do you agree with any of this, then his simple answer was, they are our closest ally. So whether you like it or not, we basically can't fight this war, I think. And again, coming back to this post-Brexit reality, that said, I don't think I think the impact, of course, has been felt. In some ways, the timing, I think, is concerning, as the UK manufacturing output, for instance, has declined in the first quarter of this year, 2025, and this is the first contraction since 2016. Industry bodies like UK Steel have questioned whether Trump realizes whether Britain is an enemy or a friend. So I think, you know, there's plenty of concern on all sides. If you contrast it with the EU, that's been more confrontational, I think, you know, Brussels is maybe working with some kind of economic brinksmanship, perhaps. London, I think they're betting more on diplomacy or negotiations as a solution to go forward. But I think the question remains whether this kind of softer approach will secure the exemptions that they are seeking, or whether it will be interpreted as a kind of form of weakness in what perhaps has become an increasingly transactional era of international trade relations.
Right, I suppose we'll see after April 2nd then. Now, like the UK, South Korea, Stephen, has also refrained from retaliation against Mr. Trump's 25% blanket tariffs on steel and aluminium imports into the US market. Do you suppose the Trump administration's tariffs are perhaps a negotiation strategy? And Stephen, if that is the case, what do you suppose are his intentions with regard to South Korea?
I'm not sure that he knows. I would say a couple of things. Like, I don't think negotiation is a negotiation tactic is the word that I would use, because that kind of implies that, you know, negotiation implies formality, it implies like official channels, it implies that like delegations from the two sides would sit down and they would seek to reach some kind of, you know, formal and transparent and like public agreement. I don't think that's the way that Trump is working. I don't think Trump has a lot of time for, you know, official channels or for like the idea of transparency. I hope I'm not being too cynical, but like my overwhelming impression is that like what Trump and his closest aides are doing is really just setting up the mechanisms of the U.S. state for their own personal gain. And I feel like what he's doing with tariffs is, you know, when he either before he got to office or shortly after, he came out with this like cryptocurrency, like you can buy into this. And that's clearly, like, I don't understand why this wasn't a bigger deal in the US media, because it like creates this like very obvious favor purchasing mechanism. Like Trump could just sit down with anybody and say, okay, well, if you want me to use my influence for your benefit, you buy a bunch of my cryptocurrency, and then it doesn't go down as a bribe, it doesn't go down as any kind of like illicit dealing, it's just this person purchasing this publicly available thing. So I have to assume, and again, I hope I'm not being too cynical, but like this is the best explanation I can think of, is that like by erecting these like very indiscriminate, these kind of like blanket barriers and just saying like, we're not going to grant exemptions, this is just the way it is, everybody has to adjust to it, really what he's doing is he's intending to create panic in all these other economies and to try and induce desperation among all these other economies who really rely on access to the U.S. market. And he's setting himself up as a kind of deal maker, and he's going to say to a country like South Korea or Canada or the UK, if you want access to our market, like tell us what you're going to bring to the table, you know, make it worth our while. A lot of Trump's rhetoric is like, these countries have taken advantage of the US for too long. They've been taking wealth out of the country for too long, and we're going to stop that, and we're going to like set up a trade relationship that is like more beneficial to the US and that is not operating in fealty to the like traditional conventions of international relations. So, again, I'm not in the room as Trump and his aides are coming up with this stuff, but like I do feel like it's a combination of like a story that resonates very well with Trump's base, which is come from a lot of like deindustrialized and sort of forgotten parts of the country, and he's telling them like the previous governments have set things up in a way that extracted wealth from where you live. I'm going to extract wealth from the rest of the world and bring it back here. Time will tell just how earnest he is in that explanation, but like it's pretty clear that at least in the short time, him and Elon Musk and all these other people who are carrying this stuff out, they stand to get very wealthy. They already are wealthy, and they stand to get that much wealthier pretty quickly.
Right. Right, then aside from the uncertainty that Mr. Trump is fueling within the global trade arena, Raphael, last week he also raised quite a bit of eyebrows and more concerns here in South Korea by referring to North Korea as a nuclear power yet again and touting his very close ties with Kim Jong-un. Now, his earlier references to North Korea as a nuclear power, including that by, I believe, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, they were dismissed by some pundits as perhaps a slip of the tongue. Are we now looking at a potential shift in U.S. strategy with regard to North Korea?
I think we're looking at something a bit more nuanced than a simple slip of the tongue, as you put it. I think when President Trump referred to North Korea as a nuclear power for, I think, the second time since inauguration, and kept praising his relationship with Kim Jong-un, I think it appears to be part of a more, I would say, calculated signaling strategy. What's particularly telling in this context, in the Oval Office meeting with NATO Secretary General, Trump didn't just casually mention North Korea's nuclear status. He explicitly stated, Kim Jong-un has a lot of nuclear weapons, by the way, a lot. And grouped North Korea alongside other de facto nuclear states like India and Pakistan. And while the White House, of course, will then issue a kind of standard clarification that Trump will pursue complete denuclearization, this repeated use of terminology, I think, suggests a potential evolution in his approach. The administration has been shifting from historically unsuccessful goal of total denuclearization to maybe a more pragmatic arms control maybe framework. And I think the timing is of course significant as well when these comments come as North Korea is partnering up more and more with Russia, having this military relationship with Russia, and has rejected denuclearization as something that is outdated and absurd. So I think Trump may be attempting to establish grounds for potential negotiations going forward, rather than just eliminating Kim Jong-un's nuclear arsenal altogether. So I think while official policy maybe remains unchanged on paper, the complete denuclearization, I think the rhetorical shift signals maybe a potential recalibration in how the US approaches North Korea when it comes to these issues. And I think we will probably see phone calls, or who knows, maybe another meeting with Kim Jong-un going forward. I think there's plenty on the table, and we have yet to see what will happen. But I think anything can happen at this moment because it's Trump.
And against this backdrop then, Stephen, what do you suppose are the broader implications of acknowledging North Korea as a nuclear power, especially by Mr. Trump himself?
I'm not sure that Trump either knows or cares what the diplomatic implications of using that language is. Trump doesn't think or act like a statesman. I think he thinks much more like a businessman. So I think from a businessman's perspective, I think he just looks at North Korea and he says they have nuclear weapons, therefore they are a nuclear power. It's kind of diplomatic wishful thinking to carry on as though this is somehow not a nuclear power when they already have all these weapons and everybody knows that. So I think Trump just doesn't see a lot of value in the conventions that surround these kinds of discussions. I mean, I think surely he has people on his team, as Raphael laid out, they've kind of backtracked from this a bit. I'm surely he has people on his team who are saying, slow down, our long-standing goal here has been to pursue the denuclearization of North Korea, and if you go around acknowledging them as a nuclear power, it sends the message that you are no longer implying that they are illegitimate possessors of these weapons, that they are a kind of legitimate nuclear power. I mean, I think that's at the basis of it, but I think at the same time, as Raphael laid out, it might also kind of strengthen his negotiation hand as a gesture of flattery. Maybe he could sit down across from Kim Jong-un and he'd say, hey man, I know you're a nuclear power, we're a nuclear power too. We're here negotiating as equals. Let's see how we can benefit each other. Let's see if we can make a deal. So I think it mostly just comes down to that. I don't know that there are any immediate implications of this. What I think will determine the implications of it is does he act on this? Does he initiate or does he agree to negotiations with North Korea on the basis, with something written into the documents of the meeting that we recognize your status as a nuclear power. As long as this is being kind of brought forth and then walked back as a slip of the tongue, it probably doesn't change anything fundamentally, but that that in itself could also change.
So for now, we can look at it as a form of perhaps sweet-talking Kim Jong-un into coming back to the negotiating table.
What's more flattering than you're a nuclear power?
Well, this is a topic we'll probably be talking about in the days ahead as well. I'm afraid that's all the time we have for this edition. So, Stephen, as always, thank you so much for your time and your thoughts. And Raphael, thank you very much for your insights.
Thank you very much.
Right, well, that ends this edition of Press Perspective. Thank you for watching. See you same time tomorrow.